Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. Maybe you think that what happens between people like us, people you watch on stages and screens, stays neat and controlled behind glass. Maybe you assume that having cameras on you teaches you how to keep every feeling inside a perfect frame. Maybe you've never stood in a quiet hallway at 3 a.m. Phone light burning your eyes, replaying a conversation that should never have happened, realizing that a single sentence can tilt a whole universe. If that's where you are tonight, this is for you. I want to tell you about the most difficult truth I've had to carry. Why my brother blamed Jimin for what happened with Taehyung, and what I learned about love, loyalty, and the dangerous silence between them. This isn't a rumor, and it isn't a headline. It's a sequence of small, observable changes, behavioral tells that don't show up in interviews or on the cheerful side of social media. It started months ago, almost quietly, like a power outage you don't recognize until the room has already gone dim. Schedules shifted by inches. A rehearsal that should have been Tuesday moved to Sunday night with the kind of urgency that suggests someone is trying to keep two people from colliding in the same doorframe. Travel plans were rerouted with explanations that sounded perfectly logical when you heard them, but felt engineered when you looked again. Managers who never call after midnight started calling after midnight. And in the space between each logistical change, something soft and human began to fray. I remember the first sign I couldn't rationalize. It was a day we were supposed to shoot something light, something fun, the kind of content that looks effortless after 1,000 hours of choreography and coordination. Namjoon was reading the rundown with that calm precision of his, measuring the tone like a producer and a poet at the same time. Jin cracked a joke about my hair and how it has its own passport. Yoongi was leaning against a speaker, pretending not to listen, which always means he's listening to everything. Jose was body warming the room with a laugh and a clap, like happiness in human form. And then Taehyung walked in and stood just a little too still. The stillness wasn't dramatic. It was a fraction of a second longer than normal. But Jimin noticed. Of course he did. He carries a barometer in his heart. He can tell you when the air is about to change. Later that evening, while everyone was decompressing, my brother called. He'd seen a clip, a moment, a freeze frame shared 1,000 times with 1,000 interpretations. He didn't ask how rehearsal went. He asked in that protective way he's always had, why didn't Jimin stop it before it got there? I didn't know what there meant yet. I only knew the way he held the word stop, like he wanted to rewind a tape with his hands and make it all come out different. I told him we were fine, that small storms bloom and pass all the time, that the forecast is never the sky. He didn't buy it. He repeated what he'd heard secondhand, something about a conversation that turned into a misunderstanding, that turned into a silence too heavy to hold. The next days were a study in subtext. You learn to read rooms when you grow up with brothers in a band. Namjoon's eyes move first. He doesn't stare, he triangulates. Jin fills empty space with lightness because he knows silence can cut. Yoongi offers short questions that feel like doorways if you're brave enough to walk through them. Hoseok keeps people in orbit, a choreographer of spirit as much as steps. Jimin tries to heal by anticipating pain a second before it arrives. And Taehyung, when he's hurting, gets cinematic. He frames his feelings in slow, beautiful shots so they won't overwhelm him all at once. I've seen this film before. I know the cues. It would be easy to make this a story about who was right and who was wrong. But that's not the truth I'm carrying. What happened is more ordinary and more dangerous. Two people who love each other in the way only brothers by choice can, each believing he was protecting the other by holding something back. There's a particular cruelty and kindness that withholds the full weight of what you feel. You think you're shielding someone from a storm. You're actually sending them outside without an umbrella. My brother kept calling. He wanted names, dates, a clean timeline that would justify his anger on my behalf. He wanted to turn confusion into a courtroom and assign roles. Witness, defendant, verdict. You're too forgiving, he said, and I heard what he meant. You're too close to see the smoke. What I couldn't explain then is that sometimes smoke isn't a sign of fire. It's the fog that rises from two people standing in cold water, trying to stay warm while refusing to swim toward each other. I didn't sleep. Not really. Nights became corridors. I walked up and down with the lights off, touching the walls, counting the doorways, finding the kitchen by memory. I drafted messages I would never send. I wrote apologies that belonged to other mouths and promises nobody asked me to make. I checked my phone until my eyes ached, watching the way people outside the circle built stories out of fragments and then tried to sell them back to us as truth. I thought about the weight of being seen and the loneliness of being misread. I thought about the day we met, each of us younger than our shadows are now, charged with the stubborn electricity of boys determined to become brothers. The hardest moment came in a practice room after midnight. The mirrors were honest in that cruel way. Mirrors are under fluorescent lights. Jimin was stretching his shoulders, counting beats under his breath, that tiny metronome he keeps tucked behind his ribcage. Taehyung was testing lines with his voice turned low, as if words sound different when no one is officially listening. I stood in the doorway for a second longer than I should have, not wanting to break the fragile truce of silence. When I stepped in, both of them lifted their heads, the way people do when a shift in gravity announces itself. None of us spoke. The speaker in the corner hummed. Outside, a cleaning cart squeaked down the hall like a soft metronome for the building itself. "Are we okay?" I asked, even though we included a weather system I couldn't see. Jimin nodded, the kind of nod that means yes and also give me a second. Taehyung half smiled, the way he does when a memory leans on his shoulder. I said the thing I've been avoiding. My brother thinks Jimin is the reason the air got heavy. The room didn't change temperature. No lightning. No thunder, just three people hearing a word that cracked open a pocket of pressure. Jimin looked at me with the kind of patience that hurts. "I thought I was helping," he said, and his voice didn't shake, which somehow made it worse. I thought if I carried more of it, he wouldn't have to. He didn't say Taehyung's name, but the syllables were everywhere. Taehyung stared at the floor like there were answers in the scuffs, then lifted his head and said, "I let it become a movie." I kept reshooting it in my head, trying to fix the ending. We stood there with our separate scripts and our shared scene, realizing we'd each been writing dialogue in the other person's mouth. I called my brother after that and told him the thing I knew he wouldn't want to hear. That blame is a ladder you climb to see farther, only to discover the view hasn't changed. "If I'm angry for you, you won't have to be," he said, and I understood the protection inside the fury. He'd watched me give so much to the world that he forgot sometimes I also know how to keep something for myself. I told him I needed him to be my brother, not my echo. I told him I needed a wise witness, not a prosecutor. In the days that followed, I paid attention to the smallest signs. Namjoon began positioning sentences like bridges. He'd say, "When we're ready for that conversation," as if naming the future makes it less intimidating. Jinhyung started cooking for us in a way that made time thicker, as if a good meal could slow down the dangerous parts of the day. Yoongi disappeared into a studio and returned with a beat that sounded like breathing underwater, which felt right because that's what we were doing, learning to inhale where you shouldn't be able to breathe at all. Hoseok texted at strange hours with the exact 2 words I needed. "You up?" He knows the best medicine is a presence, not a paragraph. And Jimin and Taehyung, how do I explain without betraying confidences? Maybe like this. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like 2 people agreeing to stand still long enough to let the earth under them stop shaking. It looks like recognizing the other person's survival strategy without insisting they change it before they feel safe. It looks like the first second of a hug that might become a real hug tomorrow. To everyone who's watched us and loved us and worried about us, I want to say this with the quiet authority of someone who has stared at the ceiling until dawn. We are not falling apart. We are recalibrating. We are learning that love isn't the absence of conflict. It's the courage to name the conflict without allowing it to rename us. We are building a stronger language for what we owe each other when the world is noisy and the private rooms are loud with unsaid things. We are practicing the art of telling the truth without turning it into a weapon. There is a version of this story that is simpler and more satisfying. A villain, a victim, a hero, a headline. You can pin it to your wall and throw darts at the person you've decided is responsible. But the real version resists that comfort. It is about the way care and fear can share a body. It is about how protection can look like control if you don't check your motives. It is about my brother loving me so much that he needed someone to blame for the ache he felt in my silence. And about me loving my brother so much that I refuse to let that blame settle like dust over their names. On an ordinary afternoon that I'll remember for the rest of my life, we found ourselves in a sunlit room with no cameras, no mics, no stage. The window was open a little, and a city sound, a bus braking, a vendor calling, a bird insisting on being heard kept threading in and out of our pauses. Jimin spoke first, gently, as if the day had ears. He said he misread what needed saying out loud and what needed time. Taehyung said he hid behind aesthetics because the raw version of the feeling scared him. I said I let my brother carry a story that didn't belong to him because I didn't want to disappoint the person who has always seen me as stronger than I sometimes am. Then we sat without moving and let the open window do the talking for a while. If you're listening to this wondering how to translate it into your own life, maybe start here. When something fractures between people who matter, look for the behaviors that changed before the words did. Notice the rescheduled plans and the strategically avoided rooms. Notice who starts making jokes at the wrong tempo and who stops making eye contact first. Notice who cooks, who writes, who disappears into work, who can't sleep. Those are the tells. Those are the places you can offer a hand. I didn't choose to become the person who says these things in public, but I accept the responsibility because I know what this family, our family, with 7 names that mean more together than they could apart, has given to me. To Namjoon, who catalogs storms and then draws evacuation maps. To Jin Hyung, who refuses to let silence rewrite the mood. To Yoongi, who turns the complicated into sound and lets us breathe there. To Hoseok, who keeps the room bright enough for honesty. To Jimin, who risks tenderness in a world that punishes it. To Taehyung, who dares to be beautiful in the way he breaks and the way he heals. And to my brother, whose anger was just love wearing armor a size too big. What happened wasn't a scandal wrapped in pretty paper. It was a lesson about the maintenance of love. And maintenance is not glamorous. It is valves and pressure gauges. It is mops and quiet apologies. It is a hand on the shoulder in the doorway of a practice room after midnight. It is the decision to show up tomorrow with a softer voice and steadier eyes. It is the quiet promise that if the room goes dark, we will touch the walls, count the doors, find the kitchen, make tea, and sit until the lights come back. If you've stayed with me this far, you already understand. There's no perfect frame where feelings behave. There is only the ongoing choice to honor them without letting them decide everything for you. My brother blamed Jimin because he needed a shape for his fear. I almost let that shape calcify into fact because I was tired and sad and wanted an easy solution. But love asks for more from all of us. It asks for presence without verdicts. It asks for confession without spectacle. It asks for time. So here is my answer tonight in a voice I hope you can trust. We are okay because we are honest. We are strong because we are soft with each other when it would be easier to be hard. We are moving forward not by pretending nothing happened, but by agreeing to keep our hands open, palms up, ready to hold what is heavy without squeezing it into something it is not. And if you're listening alone in your room, phone screen lighting your face the way mine has lit mine, I want you to know that the same is possible where you are. Pay attention. Speak gently. Refuse to choose easy blame over difficult love. The stage lights will come back on. The music will start. And when it does, we'll be there together, as always, stepping into the beat we promised to keep. The morning after that quiet room with the open window, the world pretended to be ordinary, and I tried to let it. Schedules returned as if nothing had shifted. A call sheet typed in neat lines, a car idling outside with the same driver, a wardrobe rack labeled with our names like a promise that identity can be organized on hangers. But the body knows when a day is carrying more weight than the calendar admits. I felt it behind my sternum, a new gravity, tugging in small, constant gestures, pouring coffee slower, tying my laces twice, checking the door even after I locked it. On the drive, I watched the city rehearse its own choreography. Commuters stitching lanes together, street vendors assembling their stages in metal and steam, a bicycle balancing a stack of boxes that should have been impossible to carry. People build routines to keep the big feelings from spilling. I'm not different. I told myself I would focus on the work, keep my voice clean, measure my breath through a pop filter, let lyrics do what they've always done, transform pressure into pattern. But as the studio rose ahead like a ship in dry dock, I remembered the sentence my brother kept repeating. If no one is to blame, then no one learns. His certainty had the ring of a door slamming. I stood on the curb and listened to the echo. Inside, the first thing I heard was Yoongi's low hum traveling through the floorboards like an underground river. He'd been there all night. I could tell from the coffee ring on the console, and the way his hoodie sat on his shoulders like a second moon. I built a pocket, he said, eyes flicking to the session screen, somewhere you can breathe without losing tempo. When the track started, I felt space open around my ribs. It sounded like fog lifting from water, like footsteps, finding a corridor in the dark, like forgiveness rehearsing its first vowel. I didn't say thank you. He knows I heard it. Hoseok appeared with a grin that was more architecture than mood beam and column holding the room ceiling steady. We'll warm up slow, he said, hands clapping once, twice, marking a safe speed. He pulled me into a loose line, reminded me of how shoulders soften when the feet trust the floor, how the body can tell the mind, quietly, that earthquakes end. We moved until sweat left honest streaks across doubt, and when he caught my eye, he didn't ask anything. He just nodded like a metronome nods at a drummer who has found his pocket. Namjoon arrived with a stack of papers that looked like contracts but were really bridges disguised as logistics. He placed one page in front of me. A schedule revision, nothing dramatic. 2 rehearsals swapped. A fitting moved up. A recording pushed back. Not avoidance, he said, before I could call it out. Staging, so conversations can happen with less noise. He's the only person I know who can change time zones without moving clocks. Jin-hyung set down a tray without ceremony. Tea oak, sliced fruit, something warm that smelled like home. The plate touched the table the way his jokes touched silence softly, with intention. Eat, he said, which is how he says, I'm here and you're not alone and I refuse to let a rumor out. Calorie you. He angled the chair across from mine so our knees could knock if either of us shifted. That's his brand of wisdom. Keep the furniture close enough to make confession a short reach. Jimin came in quietly, as if entering a chapel where the pews are made of soundproofing foam and the altar is a song folder. He didn't hug, he didn't look away. He stood beside me just long enough for our shoulders to understand each other again, then opened the notebook I recognized. The pages were filled with counts and arrows, tiny annotations of breath and balance. I miscounted the air, he said, eyes still on the paper. I thought a pause was mercy. It felt like oxygen to me. He traced a measure with his finger. But a pause is only kind if both people know it's a pause. The sentence hung there, a clean line, no headline would print, but every heart could translate. A little later, Taehyung arrived wearing a hat that could be read as casual or as armor, depending on the angle. He walked to the mic and checked distance with the ease of someone who understands how intimacy changes the shape of sound. His voice, when it came, was sanded down and honest. I staged it too beautifully, he said into the room, not committed to anyone and thus committed to all of us. I keep wanting pain to look like a movie so I can survive it. But sometimes it just looks like two people sitting by a window, and that has to be enough. He sang one long note, the color of wet film, and the console caught it without judgment. The day moved like a careful animal. We tracked harmonies, then tracked silence to hear if it still rasped. We built a verse where the drums were a hand knocking gently on a closed door. We let string pads rise and fall like someone learning to sleep again. Between takes, there were small repairs invisible to anyone who wasn't listening for them. The way Jimin shifted one count so Taehyung could land the vowel without squeezing. The way Taehyung stepped back a half pace to give Jimin's consonants a frame. The way my brother's name stopped being a weapon and became simply the name of someone who loves me imperfectly and is learning how to love me better. During a break, I stepped onto the fire escape. The city offered the same mixed hymn it always does. Siren in one ear, birds in the other, a delivery truck hissing truths about labor and time. I called my brother. He answered on the first ring like he'd been holding the phone in his hand all morning, impatient to be useful. Tell me what to do, he said, skipping hello. I waited until I could hear my own breath under the traffic. Try this, I said. Call forgiveness by its harder name. Practice. Not a door you push through once. A hinge you oil, an alignment you check, a noise you learn to trust until the squeak is gone. He didn't reply for a long time. When he did, the voice was smaller and closer to the boy I grew up beside. I can practice, he said, but I might mess up the steps. I told him I would count them with him. He laughed, the first true sound from him in days. And for a second I could see us again in a hallway, tapping out rhythms on our thighs, bad at it and happy. Back inside, Namjoon gathered us with the economy of a lighthouse keeper. He sketched a triangle in the air. Truth, timing, tone. When we miss any one side, the light doesn't reach the water, he said. Today, we work on tone. It's strange how technical language can be more compassionate than apologies. Tone is the shape of care inside a sentence. The room agreed without saying so. Yoongi pulled up a new session and let the click run at a resting heart rate. Talk, he said, not to the microphone. To the person who keeps mishearing you in your head. We took turns. Not speeches, not confessions for cameras. Just ordinary language softened by intent. Jimin spoke about the day he learned to anticipate pain and how hard it is to retire a skill that kept you safe. Taehyung spoke about the thrill and danger of beauty and how sometimes he sets the table so elegantly that he forgets to eat. I spoke about the myth that strength means never letting anyone see. You need time. In that small circle, truth stopped posturing and sat down. There was a moment, late in the afternoon, when the sun cut through the blinds in such precise bars that the dust floated like sheet music. Jin Hyung looked at the pattern and said, "That's our encore." We laughed because it made no sense and because it made perfect sense. The air felt lighter, not because nothing hurt anymore, but because we'd stopped pretending hurt is a sign of failure. Hurt is evidence you've attached yourself to something worth losing. As evening fell, we moved to the rehearsal space. Hoseok dimmed the harsh whites and let the warmer lamps take over. The mirrors became kinder. We worked a sequence designed not for spectacle, but for trust. 2 steps forward with eyes closed, 1 step back with a hand found, turn on breath, land together. Once, Jimin missed my palm and jerked away as if touching air could injure someone. I caught his wrist gently and set it back where it belonged. He looked at me like I'd pulled him out of water. Again, he said, and we did. When we finally stopped, bodies humming with the good ache, Taehyung stood at the threshold as if measuring the distance between rooms. He glanced at Jimin, then me, then the door. "I'll walk you out," he said, offering the simplest peace treaty there is. In the hallway, their footsteps fell into that familiar, almost sync. That means 2 people remember how to share gravity. I didn't follow. I watched their shadows become a single shape at the corner. The kind of ordinary magic that doesn't trend but saves lives. On the way home, I passed a park where a father was teaching his daughter to ride a bike. He ran behind her with one hand on the seat, then let go for a second, then caught her again. repeating the rhythm until her fear learned to breathe. That's what today was. A hand, a release, a hand, practice. I reached my door and didn't check the lock twice. Inside, I poured water and stood by the window, letting night file its paperwork. My phone buzzed once. A message from my brother. I called him. I said I was angry because I love him too, even if I don't know how to say it right. He said he knows. I'm going to be bad at this before I get good. Don't give up on me. I typed and erased and typed again, then settled on what mattered. We'll count the steps together. Some stories want a clean end. This one wants maintenance. Oil the hinge. Check the alignment. Listen until the squeak becomes a sign of life, not a flaw. Tomorrow we will sing into the same microphones and step onto the same floor and let the same lights find us. The cameras will capture only what we allow, and that is as it should be. But somewhere inside the frame, in frequencies that don't compress well, there will be a new softness circulating among us. You may not see it, you might feel it anyway. It will sound like a pocket Yoongi built for breathing, look like a plate. Jinhyung placed to make time slower, move like steps, Hosok set to keep the ceiling high, read like a sentence, Namjoon tuned for safe crossing, glow like a look. Jimin chooses when he refuses to give up on tenderness, and linger like the note Taehyung held without decoration until the room learned to trust quiet again. If you ask me how I know we're okay, I won't point to headlines or metrics or clips. I'll point to the way my brother's text ended, not with certainty, but with a promise to practice. That's how people stay. That's how families by blood and by choice survive the rumor of blame and return to the work of love. The next morning, the building smelled like rain, even though the forecast had promised sun. And I took that as a reminder that predictions are just costumes truth wears when it wants to be invited in. We were scheduled for a low-stakes content day, nothing grand, just a camera, a sofa, a bowl of fruit that never tastes as good as it looks. The room had that casual set design of comfort. Knit throw slung like a shrug, coffee table, books stacked to suggest curiosity, a plant that didn't know it was on payroll. But I could feel tension waiting in the walls like a song cue we hadn't rehearsed. The world outside thought it wanted statements. What we needed was a conversation that didn't sound like PR. Namjoon arrived first, carrying a folder, and that particular quiet he uses when he's building a bridge he hopes no one will notice crossing. He set the folder down and rolled up his sleeves the way a teacher does before chalk meets board. If we do this, he said, eyes on each of us in turn, let's do it with tone, not theater. I knew what he meant. Theater is easy. Tone is precise. Theater tells you where to look. Tone tells you how to hold what you see. Jin Hyung breezed in with a paper bag from a bakery that can fix a morning faster than any apology. He pretended to scold me for eyeing the biggest pastry and then handed it to me anyway, which is how he says, "You're still my kid, brother, even when the world calls you other names." He tilted his head toward the camera rig and murmured, "We show them what we choose, not what they demand." A lesson wrapped in sugar, butter, and boundary. Yoongi took the corner of the couch like a cat who knows the sun will find him, laptop open, headphones around his neck, a cursor blinking on a screen full of lines that look like a heartbeat. "If noise leaks into this room," he said without looking up, "we'll filter it, not fight it." He tapped a key and a warm low pad drifted under the air like a rug rolled out for truth to walk on without slipping. Hosok posted himself near the main camera, not to perform, but to radiate steadiness. He adjusted the tripod by millimeters, pointed one light into the ceiling to soften edges, and clapped his hands exactly once. "Let's breathe on the clap," he said. And we did. A silly little ritual that turns a room into a choir. Jimin slipped in with his notebook and a bottle of water he'd wrapped in a towel so it wouldn't sweat on the table. He gave me that quick check-in glance. No drama, just a landing strip, then sat close enough that his knee could ask my knee a question if it needed to. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The way he uncapped his pen was a sentence. "I'm here to annotate, not to argue." Taehyung arrived last. Hat low, jacket soft, eyes clear. He took the chair that faced the window, letting the light draw its quiet geometry across his cheekbone. He looked at the lens and then away, not coy, just honest about the difference between seeing and being seen. He had that Sunday afternoon calm he carries like a pocket watch, an old rhythm, precise and forgiving. We started rolling without slate or countdown, letting conversation find its own edges. It wasn't about what happened, because even we couldn't agree on a single hinge where everything turned. It was about how we each recognized the tell sooner this time. A message drafted and unsent. A joke landing half a beat off tempo. A doorframe that suddenly needed a second breath before you cross. We talked about maintenance, again the least glamorous part of love, and how it rarely trends because there's nothing spectacular about oiling a hinge until it stops complaining. Halfway through, a notification lit my phone screen with the brightness of a flare. My brother. It was a photo from a neighborhood cafe. 2 cups, 1 croissant torn in half, no caption. I knew the handwriting on the napkin under the plate. It wasn't his. "We're talking," he texted after a beat. "I'm practicing listening." The floor shifted under my feet in the safest of ways. A small ache let go of a larger ache. We broke for lunch. The kind of break that is mostly an excuse to move bodies so thoughts can rearrange themselves. Jimin scouted a patch of sun by the back stairwell and declared it a patio. Yoongi shared headphones with me for a minute, eyes closed. A rough mixed loop of something that felt like grief learning choreography. Hoseok filmed a 10-second clip of nothing important and then laughed at it like it was everything. His joy, a lens that improves any image. Namjoon outlined a sentence on the back of a receipt, scratched it out, wrote a better one, circled it once, then folded the paper like a secret he'd earned. Jimin ate slowly, not stalling, just giving his stomach a chance to believe the day was safe. Taehyung took photos of the light on the stair rail, close-ups so tight they looked like abstract paintings of steadiness. When we returned to the set, the air had shifted. The plant looked less like a prop and more like a living thing doing its best to be green. We decided no announcement, just a collective turn to speak directly to the people who are worried about us, not as performers but as humans who know the cost of making beauty in public. Yoongi killed the room tone and let a soft hum breathe underneath. Hoseok dropped the key light to warm the skin into truth. Namjoon leaned forward in that way that makes you feel like he's speaking across a small table. Jin-hyung straightened a book stack no one will notice. Jimin rested his hand on the edge of the cushion between us. Taehyung framed a sentence in his mouth and then let it out with the care you give to birds you're trying not to startle. I said the thing I wish I'd said earlier, that we were not looking for a culprit, we were learning a language. I told them how my brother had needed a shape for fear and had accidentally traced it around someone kind. I said names gently, like setting bowls on a table you plan to share. I described the practice room and the open window, and the way silence can be an invitation or a wall, depending on whether both people understand it the same way. I did not ask for privacy like a gate. I asked for privacy like a garden, a place where growth is possible because it isn't constantly stepped on. Jimin spoke next, voice low but not small. He told a story about a childhood teacher who trained him to count breath as diligently as steps, and how that gift can become a cage if you forget to share the count. He didn't defend himself. He redefined care. Taehyung talked about aesthetics as armor and admitted he sometimes polishes feelings until they're too smooth to grip. He smiled at his own flaw without minimizing it. That smile felt like a seatbelt clicking. Namjoon anchored the moment with context, as he does, reminding us that families chosen and blood survive, not by avoiding storms, but by investing in harbors. Jin-hyung cracked a gentle joke about us being the only group that could turn a sofa and a ficus into a therapy office, and then slipped a line about nourishment behind the laugh. Yoongi said little, but when the camera drifted toward him, he simply nodded once at the lens in a way that told everyone watching, the beat is stable. We wrapped without an ending on purpose. No moral, no montage, just the sight of people who intend to keep showing up. As the crew powered down and the room lost its borrowed glow, My phone buzzed again. My brother. We walked around the block twice. I said I was wrong about where to put my anger. He said he was wrong about where to hide his pain. We didn't solve anything. It felt like solving everything. I pressed my thumb to the screen as if I could transmit the warmth back through the glass. Evening folded itself into the city and I headed to the dance studio. Not because we needed more rehearsal, but because bodies sometimes understand what mouths are still fumbling to say. The room was empty except for the moths that always find the fluorescent lights and the scuff marks that chart our history in a language only muscle remembers. I put on the rough mix Yoongi had given me and started slow. Not a routine, just motion as apology, motion as promise. The door clicked and Jimin slipped in, quiet as a correction. He didn't ask. He fell into orbit. A moment later, Taehyung's hat appeared in the mirror. Then his face. Then the smile. That meant nothing dramatic just yet. We moved with almost no sound fabric. Shoe, rubber, breath. I found their hands without looking, then let go, then found them again, building the hand release, hand rhythm that had saved us yesterday. Jimin adjusted one angle of my shoulder with a touch that could have been a sentence. Taehyung lengthened a count with a breath you could ride like a slow elevator. At some point we were laughing, the easy kind that arrives when your body realizes it's safe again. I don't remember what was funny. I remember the relief. Later, in the locker hall where the paint always smells faintly like effort, I sat with my back against cool metal and watched condensation form on a water bottle like patient rain. My brother's name lit the screen one more time. Proud of you, he wrote. Proud of me a little too. I typed, deleted, typed, then sent. Me too. Keep practicing. A second bubble appeared. Dinner tomorrow? I smiled at the lockers. Yes, I sent. Bring the version of you that counts out loud. On the walk home, the city had washed its face and put on its night skin. Street vendors traded steam for neon. A bus sighed. A kid dribbled a ball down a block that didn't require permission. I passed a window where a family ate together at a table too small and didn't seem to mind. That's the whole lesson, I thought. A table too small and no one minding. Because there's room when the intention is to fit. I imagined our group as that table. Elbows bumping, sauces shared, napkins stolen, laughter traveling across chipped plates to soften whatever the day had hardened. You can call that sentimental. I call it infrastructure. At home, I opened the window just enough to let in a slice of honest air. The city's mixed hymn returned. Siren, bird, someone whistling off-key, the long brass note of a train deciding. I sat on the floor and let the day settle where it wanted. No grand conclusions, no oath-taking, just a quiet inventory. A pastry on set, a bridge sentence on a receipt, a nod into a lens, a hat shading eyes, a hand found in the dark, a brother circling the block until he could say love without pointing it like an arrow. Maintenance. Practice the ordinary heroism of people who refuse to let a rumor do the writing. I turned off my phone and left it face down. An act so small it felt like rebellion. Tomorrow would come with its own choreography, cameras, critics, kindness, noise. We would do what we always do. Choose tone over theater, harbor over headline, language over verdict. And when the hinge squeaked, as hinges do, we'd oil it again, check the alignment again, count the steps out loud so no one would have to guess the rhythm alone. The restaurant my brother chose was the kind of place that pretends to be ordinary until you notice how carefully the light is arranged to flatter the truth. Tables were close enough for other people's stories to brush your sleeves. The menu small enough to keep you from using choice as a shield. He waved me over with a smile that kept checking itself in the mirror and stood to hug me too tightly, an apology disguised as enthusiasm. The server poured water with a quiet that made me want to be more careful with every word. We ordered noodles because noodles don't rush. They demand attention and reward patience. I rehearsed, he said, eyes dropping to the chopsticks he hadn't split yet. Being honest without being right. I laughed, not at him, but with relief, the sound people make when the door they feared would be locked opens on the first try. We spoke like pedestrians in a crowded market. Step, look, He told me he'd never seen me this tired and that it scared him into certainty. Certainty had felt like action. I told him certainty is the cheapest armor you can buy, but it rusts fast and stains the shirt underneath. He nodded the way a student nods when a teacher finally explains why the formula works the way it does. Halfway through the meal, he pushed a small folded paper across the table. The creases were neat, the way you fold things you hope will be received. I opened it expecting a speech. It was a list of phone numbers people he called that afternoon. One was Taehyung, one was Jimin. The others were quiet figures who carry our days without appearing in our photographs. A driver, a choreographer, a studio manager who knows more about heartbeats than microphones. I told him I had aimed my worry wrong, he said. I asked what practice looks like from their side. He swallowed. They didn't owe me grace. They gave it anyway. We walked the long way to the car, letting the city explain itself in steam and neon. At the crosswalk, a bus exhaled like a giant deciding to be gentle. A couple argued softly about nothing important and then fell into step like choreography they'd been performing for years. We waited for the light to change without touching our phones. A luxury I'm trying to earn more often. Before we parted, he said, "Tell me when to show up and where to stand, and I'll stand there. I don't need to be the one who's right. I just need to be the one who's useful." I told him there would be times soon when steady was more valuable than loud. "I can do steady," he said, and his voice finally fit the coat he was wearing. The next day began with a room that looked like a small auditorium but felt like a church. We were rehearsing with strings for a live arrangement that sits closer to the bone than our usual armor of drums and lights. Chairs in a semicircle, bows resting like birds on the ledges of wrists, a pianist testing the same interval until the walls remembered it. Yoongi walked the aisle, counting under his breath, building a map the rest of us could read without getting lost. Hoseok checked sightlines not for cameras but for faces. He wanted us to see each other even when the music thickened. Namjoon stood center with a legal pad that had lived inside his jacket long enough to learn his pulse. "The point isn't perfection," he said, chewing the cap of a pen like a question. "The point is to prove we can carry this gently." He didn't say what this was, but everyone knew. Jin Hyung set a thermos at the conductor's stand like an offering and whispered something that made the first violinist laugh. The room breathed out. We started slow. The first pass sounded like caution with a pretty outfit on. The second pass sounded like memory, remembering how to be current. On the third, something unclenched, maybe in my throat, maybe in the room, and the lines began to hold without gripping. Jimin's harmony nestled inside the melody like a hand slipping into a familiar sleeve. Taehyung's note entered a fraction late in a way that made everything feel more human, like a heart that stutters when it sees someone it loves and then keeps going. In a break, that wasn't really a break. A stagehand who has known us since our shoes squeaked for different reasons handed me a coil of tape and said, "You'll want to mark this spot." I looked down. There, a foot from my usual tape X, was a scuff where 1,000 tiny pivots had cut a crescent into the stage. "It's the place you land when you think you're landing where you always do," he said, wry smile half hidden. Might as well admit it and give it tape. I pressed the tape down and thought about how many versions of me have needed new marks drawn 2 inches to the left. In the afternoon, we moved to a smaller studio to record a message. No grand statements. Just an attempt to control tone before narrative. Made a home without paying rent. The room had friendly shelves and a rug that quieted everyone's shoes. We set the camera on a tripod and kept the frame wide enough to feel like an invitation. We didn't script. We set a boundary. Speak only to the person who loves us and worries most, not to the crowd that comes to be fed. Talking to the crowd makes you loud. Talking to the person with your name in their mouth makes you precise. I went first. I told them the thing that had been knocking on my ribcage. That blame wants to be assigned quickly because it's allergic to silence, but most of the real work happens in rooms where silence is a tool, not a punishment. I described the practice we were doing in unglamorous detail, the boring heroics of the hinge and the oil and the alignment check. I said Jimin's name with the same temperature as Taehyung's, neither warm nor cooled by apology, just human and near. I said my brother's name last and thanked him for being the kind of person who will walk the block twice, if it means saying I was wrong, without tripping. Jimin spoke next about breath counting and how kindness can become controlling if you decide what someone else needs without asking. The sentence, I thought a pause was mercy, returned heavier and truer, like a key that had finally found the right lock. Taehyung followed with a small confession about beauty, that he sometimes polishes a feeling until it's too slippery for anyone to hold with him. He looked at the lens as if it were a friend who needed reassurance more than content. Namjoon wrapped us with context, not as a shield but as a map, and we stopped before the room got greedy. When the message finished exporting, the laptop fan whirred like a small airplane gathering courage. We didn't post immediately. We let it sit like bread cooling, the crust setting so the inside could breathe. During that pause, I checked my phone and found a message from my mother, a photo of a bowl of soup and a caption that said simply, I made enough. I closed my eyes and remembered the kitchen light on her table, the one I'd memorized in case the world changed shape. I forwarded the photo to the group chat with a heart and nothing else. It felt like the right kind of propaganda. The evening brought a curve we hadn't planned for, a sudden invitation to appear briefly on a live stream we hadn't expected to do together this week. It wasn't mandatory. It never is. But sometimes, you must sit at the table, so the roomers have to eat somewhere else. We gathered in a room with kind lighting and a camera that didn't try to make us flatter than our lives. The comments flew by in a language only the river understands. I didn't look at them. I looked at the faces that know the topography of mine. We kept it light on purpose. Jin told a story about getting a plant to survive in a room with no windows by moving the plant every day like a pilgrim with a very short journey. Yoongi pretended to be unimpressed and then laughed, which is how the joke pays taxes. Hoseok taught the viewers a tiny stretch that looks silly but saves necks from cruel pillows. Namjoon held up a book he wasn't ready to recommend yet, which is his way of saying, I want to share this with you when it can survive sharing. Jimin snuck in a tip about hydration that sounded like a dare. Taehyung played a single chord on a guitar and let it ring long enough that the room remembered silence can be music if you respect its boundaries. I said almost nothing, which felt like the bravest choice. When we signed off, the quiet that followed was not empty. It was earned. On the walkout, a staffer handed me a small envelope with my name written in block letters. Inside was a Polaroid someone had snapped when we weren't performing for it. Jimin, Taehyung, and me standing just out of frame from everything, faces turned toward a joke we can't see, the kind of unguarded I wish I could bottle. On the back, someone had written the date and a single word, breathing. I slid it into my wallet behind a train ticket I once kept, because the day had felt survivable. Night felt like muscle relaxing. Back in my apartment, I turned off every overhead and lit only the lamp that knows my shoulder by name. I made tea I wouldn't finish and lined 3 cups on the counter anyway, an old habit from an old wish. My brother's text arrived like a knock I was expecting. I listened today instead of arguing. The room changed. It was small and it was everything. I told him that rooms have ears and rewards. They give back what you place in them long enough. Before sleep, I wrote down a new practice in the Notes app that's part prayer, part blueprint. It was simple. Notice one thing you used to do without thinking that now requires care. Mark the new landing spot with tape. Return to it until it becomes muscle. Teach someone else where it is so they don't have to guess in the dark. I added a final line, for me as much as for anyone. When the hinge squeaks again and it will smile at it. It's reminding you there's a door here and it still opens. I lay in bed with the window cracked just enough to let the city thread its thin lullaby through the screen. Somewhere, a distant siren decided to be brief. Somewhere else, a neighbor laughed, the laugh of a day that didn't get the best of them. I thought about stages and kitchens, cameras and noodles, apologies and tape, about hands found and released and found again. I thought about my brother walking the block, counting out loud. I thought about Jimin's pause and Taehyung's chord and how both, offered gently, can become bridges. The last thing I remember before sleep was the feeling that maintenance, not spectacle, is what keeps the world together. And the first thing I promised the morning I would do was the same as yesterday. Show up, count the steps, and refuse the easy luxury of blame when love asked for practice instead. The rain started before sound check, a thin, insistent veil that turned the city into a watercolor and the venue into a ship. Backstage smelled like cables and citrus cleaner, the kind of practical perfume that says we're here to work and we mean to do it gently. The set list taped to the wall had small handwritten edits in Namjoon's tidy script arrows, brackets, a single word circled twice. Breathe. Someone had left a carton of strawberries open beside a coil of gaffer tape. Jin-hyung passed, plucked one, and set it on my palm like a sacrament. Sugar first, he said. Then courage. Yoongi was already at front of house, talking to the board like it was an animal that spooks if you raise your voice. He lifted a hand when he saw me, the subtle conductor's cue. That means trust a click. It's friend, not warden. Hoseok jogged a lane between lighting cases, counted off 8 under his breath, then looked up with that bright authority of his and said, "We land soft today, even on the loud songs." Especially on the loud songs. He made the shape of a parachute with his hands and grinned until it felt true. I checked my phone because habit owns you if you don't keep it on a leash. A headline climbed the screen like ivy, a stitched clip, stripped of context, spliced into a new certainty. It pretended to be evidence. It was only theater. My thumb hovered. I put the phone face down and slid it beneath a towel the way you tuck a child into a nap. We stepped onto the wet stage to test monitors. The empty seats cupped the sound and handed it back like a roomer learning manners. Jimin stood downstage left, the corner he favors when he's measuring the room's pulse. He rolled his shoulders, exhaled, and looked my way. It was not a plea, not a warning. It was a measure. Count with me. Taehyung wandered the wings, tracing the air with his fingers like a painter, planning where the light will land, then stopped at center and sang one note, pure as the first honesty of the day. It found the ceiling, touched it, came back unafraid. The first pass through the opener was all edges. We were good at it, muscle remembers. But good can be a decoy. Namjoon called us in with a small circle of his hand and said, "Again, but let the ceiling be lower." He meant, give the audience permission to meet us where humans breathe, not where myths pose. On the next pass, the chorus felt like a window you open with both hands so it doesn't slam. A runner slipped a paper into my hand, last minute camera notes, a sponsor request that we'd already decided to decline, and a line from management. There might be a question about the rumor during the pre-show live. We had the right to pass. We also had the chance to practice. I looked at Jimin and Taehyung. They didn't flinch. Practice, then. The live stream room was a small square with a low ceiling and lights soft enough to make even fear look rested. We sat shoulder to shoulder in an unarranged order the way real families do when the couch decides. Comments flew in a stream no human mind can metabolize. Namjoon thanked people for showing up. Jin-hyung told a story about a stubborn umbrella. Yoongi said he'd slept 4 hours and felt like a new species. Hoseok made a tiny heart and then larger, then joked about heart inflation and the central bank of love. The moderator, kind, careful, tilted his head. "There's a clip circulating," he began, almost tender. "Is there anything you want to say?" Silence flexed, but didn't snap. I counted a breath. "There's always a clip," I said, steady. "We're learning to love each other in public without letting the public do the loving for us." Jimin nodded, not at me, but at the space between us. "Sometimes we pause," he said. "We're practicing telling each other when the pause is mercy and when it's a wall." Taehyung added, "Beauty is not proof, it's just light. We're careful not to mistake lighting for truth." We smiled, not the poster smile, the kitchen smile. The moderator let it be enough. The room exhaled. Back in the corridor, my phone buzzed with a message from my brother. 3 words, proud. Keep counting. And a photo of his hand on the table beside someone else's hand, space between them measured in centimeters, then a second photo with less space. Progress documented like a science experiment. I laughed at the tenderness of evidence. Doors opened. The venue filled with the warm roar that means 1,000 hearts have agreed to beat near one another for a while. The curtain breathed like a living thing. Hoseok bounced on the balls of his feet, shook out tension like a boxer who refuses to let love be a fight. Yoongi squeezed my shoulder once and said, "Trust the pocket." Jimin slid his palm along the back of my hand and left it there long enough to remind a nerve what it's for. Taehyung adjusted his in-ear, straightened his jacket, and looked at us one by one, as if to say, "I see you, not your silhouette." We went on. The first song felt like walking into weather you dressed for correctly. The second was muscle memory dressed as joy. On the third, a banner unfurled in the balcony. Homemade letters slightly crooked, which is how you can tell love wrote them. We're not asking for perfect, just for you. I caught it on a downbeat and almost dropped a lyric because sometimes kindness is heavier than any criticism. Jimin saw it too. His harmony lifted half a step, not musically, spiritually. In the bridge of a song that has always been a negotiation between ache and resolve, our eyes found each other. His, mine, Taehyung's, a small triangle of recognition. He extended a hand in choreography we've done 100 times. I took it a fraction later than usual because I wanted to choose it again in the present tense, not because a past version of me wrote it down. When our palms met, the room shouted something wordless that translated in every language as yes. Mid-set, the stage manager whispered to Namjoon that we had time for one unscripted minute before the lights had to chase their cues again. He nodded and looked at me. I stepped to the mic and let the hall settle. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone to see me adjust, I said. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is mark a new landing spot with tape so your people can find you in the dark. I tapped my shoe on the tiny crescent of scuff a stagehand had shown me. We're marking it together. A cheer rose like a promise being notarized. In the final chorus of the last song, something happened that would never be dramatic enough for a headline and yet felt like the whole point. Taehyung lifted his face into the lights and sang the line he always polishes. It arrived without decoration, as plain and beautiful as water. Jimin didn't reach to embellish, didn't anticipate, didn't prescribe. He matched the simplicity, set a floor under it, and let it stand. I threaded my voice between theirs, not as lead, not as cover, but as ligament. The cord held. You could feel people breathe. Encore ended the way good nights should. Slightly under what the room thinks it can hold, so the room goes home carrying a little light for later. We bowed. Not as men who conquered a place, but as men grateful not to have been conquered by their own noise. Off stage, the darkness felt kind. Staff we love, but rarely they met our eyes with that look that says, you did the right work, the boring, holy work of care. In the alley behind the venue, steam rose from a manhole like the city thinking. A fan who had waited quietly by the barricade, an older woman with a rain hat and a smile that understood time, didn't ask for a photo. She pressed a small wrapped candy into my hand and said, "For the hinge." I don't know how she knew. Maybe the world tells the truth to anyone willing to overhear it. Back inside, I found Jimin in the stairwell, where the lights always flicker once before committing to illumination. He was sitting on the step that spells out EXIT if you're looking from above. I wanted to say something, he started, then shook his head as if to restart the sentence. Thank you for counting with me. I sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder the way boys in a movie share a secret. Thank you for telling me what number we were on, I said. We didn't hug. The air between us did the holding. Taehyung appeared like a well-timed chord, not late, not early, just right. He held out a Polaroid I hadn't known someone had taken. The three of us on stage, not at the front, but turned in toward one another during a transition. Faces half lit, expressions unguarded. On the white border, he'd written with a thin black pen, "Maintenance, not myth." I slid it next to the other Polaroid in my wallet. The two looked like before and after, except both were during. My brother called as the van pulled away. I put him on speaker because some conversations are better with witnesses. "I watched the stream," he said. I felt the room through the screen. "Tell Taehyung I like the undecorated note. Tell Jimin that the silence he made felt like a chair, not a lock." He cleared his throat. "Tell them I'm practicing staying where I am without pointing." From the back seat, Taehyung said. "We heard you," Jimin added. "Keep the chair out. We'll sit." The city slid by like a patient metronome. Red lights, green lights, a bicycle slicing rain, a dog deciding to be brave. I leaned my head back and let the motion rock me into a different kind of focus. The phone buzzed once more, a photo from my mother's kitchen. 3 bowls this time, not 2. Caption, "Still enough." I felt something in me stand up and stretch. At home, I hung my damp jacket by the window and listened to water barter with the eaves. I placed the candy from the rain hat woman on the table and didn't unwrap it. Some offerings are meant to live longer than their sugar. I wrote a sentence in my notes app that I wanted to read tomorrow before sound check. When the rumor comes dressed as evidence, answer with practice. When fear asks for a villain, offer it a chair. When love squeaks, oil the hinge and smile because the door still opens. Sleep found me with my phone face down again. A ritual that is starting to feel like skill. The last image my mind kept before the dark did its useful work was not a headline, not a stage, not even the banner with its crooked letters. It was 3 hands, midair, finding each other in a place the camera couldn't quite see, completing the circuit that turns noise into music and people into a family, sturdy enough to stand in the rain without mistaking weather for fate. Morning came in fragments, the kettle's soft click, a neighbor's radio slipping through the wall like a friendly ghost, the quiet pride of muscles that had done honest work. I stood by the window and watched the city calm itself for the day. Delivery scooters traced cursive on the streets. A woman in a yellow coat rehearsed a conversation on her way to the corner store, hands conducting an invisible orchestra. I wrote 2 words on a sticky note and pressed it to the glass. "Keep counting." It looked small there, a lighthouse built from paper, but even small lights do their job if you let them. At the studio, the day greeted us with an odd brief. A documentary team, gentle, respectful, wanted an hour to capture process, the human part. That phrase used to trip alarms in me. Now it just reminded me to check the lock on my boundaries and then open the door deliberately. Namjoon talked to the director in that manner of his that makes structure feel like kindness. "We're not proving anything," he said. "We're letting people overhear what's ordinary." The director nodded, surprised by how unglamorous our plan sounded. "Good. Glamour is a costume. We needed work clothes." Jin Hyung had converted a corner into a kitchen again. Kettle, sliced pears, sea salt, a thermos wearing a knitted sleeve someone's aunt made. He poured tea into paper cups like a priest who's seen enough to know holiness is mostly temperature control. "Don't scald truth," he said, passing me a cup. I laughed and burned my tongue anyway, which felt like a fair metaphor for my 20s. Yoongi sat at the console with a new session open. On the screen, the waveform looked like careful handwriting. He'd sampled the sound of a chair sliding across the rehearsal room floor and turned it into a pulse that breathed beneath the track. "Listen," he said, "Maintenance, remixed." When it looped through the monitors, the room changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window you didn't realize was painted shut. Hoseok taped a line along the floor between the vocal booth and the couch. "This is today's landing," he said, patting it like a coach encouraging the field itself. Not a barrier, a guide. He ran us through a quick warm-up that ended with a silly face we used to make in dorm rooms at 2 a.m. Tongue out, eyes crossed, and for 5 seconds we were hopeless boys. Again,